Welcome to episode 1 of the 3-part Custard Spectacular. I will be diving deep into the 3 major types of custard. And first up, baked custards, which are all bake, no bite. And what I mean by that is, of course, they're creamy and smooth, but also that baked custards are so simple to make. And I really think that once you master certain custards like these, it really opens up a whole world of baking possibilities. In this episode, we will be making 2 of the most famous kinds of baked custard, Pot de Crème and Crème Brûlée. Baked custards are very easy to make. They are a simple blend of a dairy base, eggs, sugar, and some kind of flavoring. And in this episode, we're gonna dive into everything you need to know, from equipment to techniques, and of course, where things could go wrong and how to fix them. It's going to be a delicious episode. Let's get baking. One thing I love about baked custards is that while they feel very fancy, they are actually really simple at their core and a great make-ahead dessert. This is actually why you see them on so many restaurant menus, because the restaurants can make them ahead and have them ready whenever it is time for dessert. So you can borrow that same tip and do it in your home. Like all of the custards we will be talking about in this 3-part Custard Spectacular, baked custards are incredibly versatile. They can be flavored a number of different ways, but one of my favorite techniques is by infusing. To infuse the dairy base for your custard, just bring it to a simmer, and then you can add ingredients like herbs, spices, citrus zest, tea, vanilla bean, coffee, really anything you want that can add a lot of flavor. Then cover the pot, turn the heat off, and let it steep for anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour, depending on how intense you want that flavor. This is a really great way to add a ton of flavor to your custards with very little effort. I also like to remind people that baked custards are also very familiar to you, maybe even in other desserts, things like pies, pumpkin and pecan to name a few, and cheesecake. All of these are just baked custards inside a crust. Understanding baked custards is really all about understanding the baking process itself. Now, in the oven, the eggs in the custard are going to slowly coagulate. If they do this slowly and gradually enough, they set to be a very silky smooth, delicious consistency. If it happens too fast, you can end up with something rubbery or even like scrambled egg in consistency, and that's definitely what we want to avoid. We just want creamy, dreamy, beautiful baked custards all the time. Water baths are one way you can help a baked custard to bake properly and more gradually. They just really encourage those egg proteins to set in a way that ends up silky and luxurious. And remember, higher temperatures are typically baked custards' worst enemies. They have a tendency to want to be baked low and slow so that those proteins can set extremely gradually. Let's start with Pot de Crème. Pot de Crème is a delicious baked custard that is made inside some sort of little covered vessel, aka pot, the Pot de Crème. Let's start by getting our baking vessels ready, and because these need to be covered, I particularly like baking these in canning jars. That way I can put the custard in and seal the lid on top. If you don't have something like this, or you don't have smaller jars like this that are a good size for a baked custard dessert, you can always just bake them in ramekins or any kind of oven-safe baking dish and cover the pan tightly in plastic wrap and aluminum foil to help keep it sealed during baking. I put my canning jars into a 9x13 pan because we are going to bake these in a water bath to help them bake really gradually and gently. And I want to be able to have that water level come about halfway up the sides of the baking vessel. So a 9x13 is really nice because it gives us some bigger walls. Oop, my kettle is ready, which brings me perfectly to my next point. That while you're getting all of your ingredients for your pot de crème ready, you want to bring some kind of kettle or a pot of water, something with a pour spout, to a simmer to use for that water bath. So now that my water is all hot, I'll go ahead and turn it off for now. We just want to make sure that it's warm when we add it to our water bath later. So we'll start by actually making kind of an infused sugar with the citrus zest and the vanilla bean. I'm going to just zest my orange here and put it right into the granulated sugar. Then I'll just use my fingers to sort of combine them. The granules of the sugar are capable of helping to extract some of those essential oils from the citrus zest. It's really one of those things that you can do in baking that just takes an extra few minutes, but has a humongous flavor payoff. And we'll know that our sugar is kind of the right flavor level or has been like mixed properly once the actual sugar itself is orange. Okay, we'll save this orange because we're gonna take a little juice from it in a minute. I'm gonna cut my vanilla bean in half lengthwise and just scrape all the seeds into the sugar. If you don't have a vanilla bean, you can also just add vanilla extract into your custard base, or you can add vanilla paste into your custard base. You might notice that a lot of my recipes call for vanilla paste, and that's just because it's more shelf stable than vanilla beans, which can get dried out with time. So if you're someone who really likes those flecks of vanilla beans, and we all know that here on Bake It Up a Notch, I'm an extreme fan of vanilla beans. Hold on, look. Bing. They're twins. Cousins, identical cousins. No. Now let's rub our vanilla bean and our citrus zest into the sugar. And the granules are also gonna help break up the vanilla bean because it really wants to clump together all of those seeds. So we can just kind of work to help distribute them throughout, and then also we're distributing all of that orange zest, and it's actually going to completely change the color of the sugar, which is so lovely. And this smells so good. It already smells like a creamsicle. It's like the most amazing thing. Next, we are going to scald and infuse our cream and milk mixture for our pot de crème. It helps to dissolve the sugar, which is really important, but also by heating the milk, we can temper our egg yolk mixture. And the eggs are what is going to help set this to be that really thick, indulgent, custardy consistency. But in order to get there, we don't want to risk scrambling the eggs. So we don't want to add eggs and throw them right into the oven with milk. We want to start by warming up this milk, using that warm milk to slowly raise the temperature of the eggs. That way, when it gets into the oven, it's already kind of on its way to coagulating the way we want it to. So let's start. We've got our cream and some milk. Let's put our cream into a pot, and we'll also add our milk. Our cream and milk are simmering, so let's add that delicious citrus vanilla sugar into it. I'll go ahead and stir this for a few minutes to help dissolve the sugar. Then I'm gonna turn the heat off, cover the pot, and let it steep for a little while, really just for that vanilla bean and that citrus zest to really infuse the base of our pot de crème. So you can do this for just about 15 minutes, and you can get your other ingredients ready while you're doing it. Here, I'm just gonna keep stirring until that sugar's dissolved. Then I'll let it sit, and we'll finish mixing up our custard. All right, this cream is so nicely infused. I can smell the citrus, I can smell the vanilla. Now let's use it to temper our eggs while it's still warm. I'm just going to drizzle just a little bit into this to help raise the temperature of those egg yolks. There are 6 large egg yolks in here, and we're going to then just combine everything back together. The heat is off on this pot, so I'm just gonna whisk it in. Now we've just made our custard base. This is one of the things that I love about making baked custards is they really are so simple. We basically only need to heat it to dissolve the sugar, to add any flavor that we need, to help us with this early egg part of it, making sure that we're gonna end up with the silkiest custard possible. So I only have one more ingredient that I'm going to whisk in, which is some fresh squeezed orange juice from that orange I zested, just to make sure we really drive in that delicious creamsicle flavor. The only thing left to do is to pour our prepared custard into some kind of container with a pour spout. Now make sure that all these containers you're using when you're whisking the eggs, everything, that they are all heat safe. So this is a great measuring cup to use because I know it's heat safe, and it also has this really nice pour spout. It's going to make it easy to get into our containers. All right, I've got my baking dishes. Let's go ahead and divide the custard evenly between these jars. I'm gonna take this dish over to the oven along with my kettle of water. I'll slide the oven rack out, gently place this on, and then I will fill it with hot water as close as I can to be about halfway up the sides of the jars. Let's put the lids on so that each of our custards are covered for their time in the oven. And then these are gonna bake at 300 degrees Fahrenheit for 1 hour to 1 hour and 30 minutes until they are set around the edges but appear slightly jiggly in the center. They are going to be so creamy. And remember, these custards are going to firm up more as they cool and chill. And typically pot de crème is served chilled, but we'll talk more about that, the cooling process, a little bit later. All right, to the oven. After the custards are set, let them cool to room temperature, then refrigerate them until you're ready to serve. They can be refrigerated for up to 4 days. Crème Brûlée is famously 2 delicious layers, a silky, creamy custard on the bottom and a crackly, caramelized layer of sugar on the top. But you know me, I've got to bake it up a notch, so this also adds a 3rd layer, a delicious, creamy, chocolatey layer in the bottom. So I always refer to this as my black bottom crème brûlée because that chocolate is sort of waiting for you with each bite as you dive in. It is so delicious. First up, let's make sure your dishes are ready to go. I like to use shallow ramekins for this. So these are about 6-ounce ramekins, and they're perfect for this because we get that really thin layer of chocolate on the bottom, then that layer of creamy custard. But you can use any kind of oven-safe baking dishes you've got. I've got them set onto a baking sheet because, again, we are going to utilize a water bath. In this case, we don't need the sides of the pan to be as tall. We don't need to use as much water because the dishes themselves are not that tall. Again, we're just going to aim to get about halfway up the sides of these ramekins. So while we're working on all this, I'll also have my kettle over here getting ready to boil. That way my water is nice and hot when my custard's ready to go. So first thing, I'm gonna make the ganache. I've got my chocolate here, and I'm just simmering a little bit of cream in my tiny pot here. And once it comes to a simmer, I will put it over the chocolate. We'll let it sit for about 15 seconds. That's just to help that melting all start and let everything start to get kind of homogeneous. But why do we only call it a butter warmer when it does so much more? It warms cream. It makes tea. We love it. Then we'll stir it until it is creamy and totally smooth and divide it between our ramekins. Our little ganache ramekins are all ready to go. Let's set those aside for a few minutes. And we are going to get the base of our custard ready. So in this case, I'm not actually going to heat all of the cream. I'm just going to heat enough cream that I can dissolve the sugar, infuse a little of that vanilla bean, and also dissolve that little bit of salt we're adding. So a portion of the cream is going to go into a small pot here. I'll also add the sugar in there, and we'll go ahead and have our vanilla bean and scrape all the seeds into there as well. Beautiful. This looks nice and hot. Let's use that to temper our egg yolks. Perfect. And now we can add the rest of our cream in there. And then I always like to transfer the custard base to some kind of vessel with a pour spout. And I'm just going to transfer this in. Let's bring our ramekins back. And we'll just divide our custard evenly between the 6 ramekins. Okay, so now, are we ready for super fun trick? It's been a while since we brought out our friend, the kitchen torch. She's a real bad bee. Whenever you whisk something that's egg-based, we've incorporated a little bit of air into it, right? So both the cream likes to have air incorporated into it and the eggs. So we have all these bubbles on the surface. And even though we are going to cover this with a crispity, crunchity layer of caramel eventually, I want a smooth-topped creme brulee. And the reason that I want it is because I want an excuse to use the kitchen torch, and this is such a fun little trick. So if you pass a flame briefly over the surface of your custard, we don't want to do it for too long, but it's going to pop all those bubbles, and it will even bring other bubbles that are kind of right underneath the surface up to the top and pop them. Let's take these to the oven. They are going to bake at 325 degrees Fahrenheit for 45 to 55 minutes until they appear just set around the outside and slightly jiggly in the center. And of course, I'm also going to take my kettle over so that I can fill this base pan with a water bath as well so that they cook so gradually. Let's go. When the custards are finished baking, remove them from the water baths and let them cool to room temperature before you caramelize the tops. They can also go into the refrigerator where they can be kept for up to 4 days. Okay, so here are some creme brulee I made earlier. They've actually been sitting in the refrigerator. And it's always okay to hold a baked custard in the refrigerator, and they're often served chilled. But this creme brulee is a little bit different because it has that chocolatey layer on the bottom. I actually don't really mind serving it directly after baking. Kind of get that warm custard and also that soft, gooey ganache. If you do decide to make it ahead of time, you can put it back into a baking sheet like this and pour some water from your kettle into the base of the baking sheet. That's going to warm just the ganache part and get it nice and soft right before serving. The other thing we want to do, of course, right before serving is brulee our tops. So our friend, the torch, is back. And I'm going to just spoon a little bit of sugar onto each, and then we'll kind of like, try to shake it around to get it into an even layer. And I do want to point out that I use different baking dishes here than for the ones that I have in the oven right now that we just made. But that's one of the things that's beautiful about this, is that you can kind of make these in different sizes. You can use what you've got on hand. It doesn't need to be that exact baking dish. And these are little gratin dishes. And I sort of love to encourage people that if you already have something like that in your kitchen, you don't need to buy a special ramekin to make a delicious dessert like this. Use whatever little individual baking dishes you might have on hand. And for those that do want to buy and kind of splurge on a little something or other, just remember that now that you've got those little dishes, you can use them for all sorts of things. We can use them for vegetable side dishes. We can use them for little individual mac and cheese portions. We can use them for so many things. The caramelizing should really be done close as possible to serving, but that's one reason that I really like it, is it's kind of a fun party trick and a good excuse to get out your torch for your friends and family, because your torch is a beloved member of the family now, as some of you have let me know in the comments here on YouTube. So please, if you love your torch, you let us know, because we love ours too. You'll need about 2 teaspoons or 8 grams of sugar per ramekin. You just want a nice thin layer all over the top. When you start to use the torch, at first the sugar will start to melt, then it will start to bubble, then it will start to caramelize. Be patient and don't be afraid to hold your torch at differing heights to make sure you don't get too many burnt bits, but the whole thing is caramelized evenly. I like to put the custards onto a metal sheet tray just because that is heat safe and I don't have to worry about if the torch comes in contact with it. Even though baked custards are simple at heart, there are some mistakes that can happen. So let's talk about them so that hopefully we can prevent any problems when you are making your own at home. The first, as I talked about, is proper baking of the custard. And we've already sort of talked about this and determining doneness in custards. Follow those cues and you should be fine. But remember, overbaked custards can be tough and rubbery, and underbaked custards can be soft and liquidy. So we really just want to find that sweet spot where the eggs have just perfectly set, which gives us the creamiest result. In front of me, I have a creme brulee that almost looks like it's been bruleed, but it hasn't been. It's just been way overcooked. And one of the first things you can see is literally it is rubbery, because normally your spoon should go right through because it's such a silky custard. But I'm actually having to sometimes I hate making the mistakes, because like this one is sort of sad. It's just so tough and like rubbery. We've got our beautiful chocolate layer on the bottom, but it's like the custard is not enjoyable to get there. So, we want to avoid this mistake whenever we can. Another mistake that you can have is by not really tempering those eggs properly. It's really, really important that we don't try to add the eggs right to the pot, because that metal pot really is retaining a lot of heat, and any bits of egg that come directly in contact with it are going to be likely to cook immediately, scramble, become kind of gritty and unpleasant in texture. So to avoid this, we temper the eggs the way I showed by heating up the dairy base, adding it to the eggs in a heat-safe bowl. When you end up with that kind of gritty egg mixture, you can see sometimes physical spots in the custard that brown unevenly. Like in this case, we have some actual browning that happened on the surface of a pot de crème, even though it was covered. That shouldn't happen, but really what that is are little bits of egg that actually got overcooked. And you can even see a little bit of grittiness in the surface texture of this particular pot de crème. This is more like what a pot de crème should look like, and this is also actually a mistake in front of me, but you can see the difference in the surface of how smooth and creamy this one is for the most part, and this one is a little bit kind of pocky. The final mistake is one that really can be easily avoided, but really can cause you problems at the same time. It's really important that you gradually cool custards that have been baked. Some people, I think, are tempted to say, oh, my dinner party is later tonight, so they just came out of the oven, I'm going to put them in the refrigerator right away. But these intense temperature changes from warm to cold can cause a number of issues. They can cause the custard to crack, and more importantly, they can cause the custard to weep. The weeping just kind of makes a layer of liquid sort of on the surface of the custard. And the main reason that this could be a problem is if you were trying to brulee the surface, like in creme brulee. If the surface is sort of moist or wet, it's going to be difficult when you put the sugar on. It's just going to start to dissolve, and you're never going to be able to get that nice, crispy, crunchy layer. So you can kind of solve this by just pressing a paper towel directly on the surface anywhere that you see moisture, and you should be good to brulee. Let's talk about the most important step in baked custards, which is determining the doneness. It's really, really important for the smoothest custard that they set and bake gradually. Be patient. While the time that's given in a recipe is important, it's more important to look for those visual cues. You're looking for the custard to be just barely set around the outside and still a little bit of movement towards the center, a jiggle as it were. The custard should not appear liquid in any way. So if it looks at all like the consistency it was when you put it into the oven, it's not yet done. And remember, baked custards will do a small amount of carryover cooking. This is a term that's used to describe the heat that is retained in the baked item as it starts to cool. So that's one of the reasons we don't want to bake them too much. If you bake them to the point that they're completely set, they will carry over further, and that may be when you start to see cracks or even taste a rubbery custard. But if you bake them until just barely set during carryover cooking, they will set to that perfect, smooth, creamy consistency that we all love about a good custard. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Bake It Up a Notch, where we talked all things baked custard. As always, the recipes that we made in this episode are linked in the video description below, so head down there to snag them or head to food52.com. If this episode inspires you to get baking, please use hashtag Bake It Up a Notch and leave us comments. We love to know what you're making in your own kitchens. We've got 2 more delicious episodes in the Custard Spectacular, so be sure to come back to see them. And until next time, happy baking. Okay, I heard we have some creme brulee fans in the back. You want to come try some? Yes. Ooh.
So many layers.
Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic.
I don't do subtle, Harper.
No, it's over.